Hello, and welcome to Very Cold Lasagna, the podcast for all your filthy casual takes on the world of sports. I am your host, Dylan Lasagna. This is episode number 274. And in this episode, we're here to continue along our journey to look at all 32 teams in the National Football League as they prepare their grinding 4-month-long journey to either claim a playoff spot in January or their early ticket to Cancun as they make their preparations for the 2025 NFL regular season. So this is part 3 of our 2025 team-by-team regular season previews. And we've already done the 8 teams in the last 2 episodes. So we've already covered the NFC West and we already looked at the AFC West. So we've already done 8 teams so far. And we're going to look at another set of 4 teams here in this episode. So what exactly are those 4 teams and what exactly is the division that we're going to be talking about today? Well, it's in the title of this podcast. So those 4 teams are going to be residing in the AFC North. So normally we'd go back to the NFC North, but again, we're shaking things up, pal, this year, and we're going to be looking at the AFC North. So those teams are the Cleveland Browns, the Cincinnati Bengals, the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Baltimore Ravens, all in this episode of the podcast as we continue along our team-by-team 2025 NFL Filthy Casual Team previews. So, yeah, I've been enjoying these so far, and I hope you've been enjoying them too. And if you hopefully come across this podcast, you either agree or disagree with my opinions on whether they're your team or somehow not your team. So let's have a conversation about it in the comments or wherever my socials are. Very Cold Lasagna on Twitter, Instagram. And with that being said, let's get right into the first team on our list, and that is the Cleveland Browns. Yes, that is right, the Cleveland Browns. The laughing stock, the typical laughing stock in the NFL, as most people like to call them, a certain section that includes me, the skid marks. You know, the skid marks that you like to wipe your ass with on the toilet and take a huge dump. Yeah, those skid marks. The skid marks for the last, since their existence. Since they came back in 1999. So, it was no different in 2024. It was the same and tried and true story for the Cleveland skid marks. So, off the heels of what was, in my opinion, a pretty good SummerSlam in their home stadium of, what was it, Cleveland Browns Stadium. So, it wasn't necessarily a skid mark of a SummerSlam, but in contrast to that, we got a skid mark of a 2024 season for the Cleveland Browns. And that was mainly because of Deshaun Watson's continued underwhelming play that was worsened by the fact that, well, the man tore his Achilles mid-season. And that was not just once, but twice. And the man tore his Achilles twice. One mid-season and one a couple months later while he was supposed to rehab that thing. And the QB play that followed throughout the season, it was very unwatchable. I'd say even more unwatchable than the Raiders that season. And yeah, it was another typical skid mark season. They finished tied with a bunch of other teams for the worst record in the NFL at 3-14. So, yeah, it was a typical skid mark season for a large majority of their existence. So, obviously, the goal for 2025 is, well, put on a watchable team. Get a quarterback, for goodness sakes. Yeah, the long list, another addition to the long list of quarterbacks for the skid marks. So, obviously, that was the number one need for the Cleveland Browns is get a quarterback. Address that quarterback position because Watson's injury and unlikely availability for 2025 has made the trade for him one of the worst in NFL history because you give up all those draft assets and to the Houston Texans that included, I believe, if I remember correctly, 1 or 2 first-round picks in 2021 or the 2022 offseason. Yeah, that was a big major oof. A big major oof for the Cleveland skid marks. So they need to get a starting quarterback with that second overall pick in the draft. A lot of people were pointing to Shadur Sanders of Colorado. So they at least had that ammunition to get a quarterback with that second overall pick in the draft. So they also had to find a new left tackle because, well, they needed to find a replacement for a bust that was Jedrick Willis to better protect the blind side of their new QB. And they needed to add help to the defensive line because they needed to nab multiple defensive tackles and edge rushers because some were going to be free agents this recent offseason, and they didn't do well in that area in 2024 in general. So looking at this past offseason for the Cleveland Skid Marks, they made a couple changes to the coaching staff. They promoted tight ends coach and passing game specialist Tommy Rees as the new offensive coordinator to replace Ken Dorsey, who, once again, didn't do all that great. He was notable for doing pretty badly in Buffalo when he was trying to do stuff with Josh Allen, and once again here in Cleveland, didn't do all that great. So they promoted Tommy Rees as the new offensive coordinator. They also gave a big fat contract extension with Myles Garrett after he initially requested the trade right after the season ended, but Myles Garrett sold his soul to the Browns for life. So gotta get that money somewhere. They also released a few people. Two of the notables included safety Juan Thornhill and defensive tackle Dalvin Tomlinson. And they also traded for a few backup quarterbacks like Kenny Pickett from the Eagles, as well as no, that was the only one. Correct. That was a little correction. They swapped backup quarterbacks. So they traded for Kenny Pickett and traded away Dorian Thompson-Robinson to the Eagles and a 5th round pick. So yeah, add another one to the list. So some of the notable additions to free agency included Jerome Baker from the Dolphins, Malik Collins at defensive tackle from my 49ers. They also brought back Joe Flacco from the Colts, and to add on to the offensive line, guard Tevin Jenkins from the Bears. They didn't really lose anyone of note, like Elijah Moore at receiver and backup quarterback Jameis Winston. So they didn't really lose anyone of note, which I guess is good for a team like the Skid Marks, but at the same time, you're so strapped on money and draft picks. So yeah, not really a lot of leeway for the Browns. So looking at the draft, they didn't use that number 2 overall pick to get a quarterback, but for at least, as we'll talk about in just a matter of seconds, that was kind of a benefit for them. So they drafted defensive tackle Mason Graham from Michigan, so that is going to be much needed help for Myles Garrett. They also drafted a running back by the name of Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State to replace Nick Chubb. They also drafted, surprisingly, 2 quarterbacks for whatever reason. One of them was Dylan Gabriel from Oregon, who I don't really know too much about, and somehow, some way, who ended up in their laps was the name I just mentioned just a minute or two ago, Shedeur Sanders from Colorado. He ended up in their laps, and yeah, Shedeur is a Cleveland Brown, or maybe a skid mark. Yeah, he ended up in their laps. He fell all the way down to, I believe it's the 4th or 5th round of the draft, if I remember correctly, and boom, his slide ended it in Cleveland. So looking at this offseason for the Cleveland Browns, drafting 2 quarterbacks was a bit questionable, let alone getting 4. Game 4 in the offseason, as, if you hear some birds in the background, I mean, it's hot in this room, in the room I'm recording in, but bear with me. Just bear with me, okay? But hey, they managed to get Shedeur Sanders. I mean, many were laughing at the fact that the Browns drafted the smaller Dylan Gabriel, but not so much at the fact that the Browns stole Shedeur in the 5th round when no one else would take him. So far, as we looked at minicamp, not me personally, but like looking at minicamp from the little tidbits that I saw, Shedeur is the 4th string quarterback right now, and it looks like he's getting humbled a bit by not just the slide, but being just the 4th string quarterback as a whole. So hopefully, in this position, and being drafted to the skid marks in general, of all places, is going to keep humbling him and his dad, Deion Sanders. But yeah, not exactly a good start for Shedeur. And also the fact that he's already been cited for 2 speeding violations. Meanwhile, you have Mason Graham and Malik Collins. I believe they're good additions to Myles Garrett. So that should be good for Myles Garrett. However, I'm not sure why they released Ogo Okoronkwo. Why they released him. So at least, those 3 will be good additions to that front 4, but they still need someone else to step up to complete it. So looking at some of the key games for the Browns this upcoming season, obviously I look at the first 3 games for a team that's as bad as Cleveland, like the first 2 division games. They're facing Cincinnati Bengals team that's always going to be competitive in an AFC North division that's always going to be tough. And then you head out to Baltimore in week 2 to take on the division winner from last year against the Ravens. And then you look at a gauntlet from hell from the opposite division, that is the NFC North, weeks 3 to 5. The Packers, you go to Detroit to face the Lions, and then you go overseas in London to face the Vikings in week 5. Yeah, you talk about a grueling start for the skid marks, and you could possibly be looking at an 0-5 start if you're Cleveland. And if you're lucky, given that the Bengals have not exactly played well in Cleveland, maybe you'll get a lucky win there. So obviously the biggest questions going into this upcoming season for Cleveland is, well, can somehow, some way, Shedeur Sanders put his money where his mouth is and suddenly rise to the top to, I'd say, at least the second string quarterback? Because he wasn't exactly bad in college, because he at least had the dual threat ability. I just think that, looking at a little bit of his film, he just tried to make too much happen. He tried to make too many things happen. And not only that, the pre-draft process for him wasn't exactly great. And it reminded me a lot of, LeVar Ball. LeVar Ball always running his mouth about his son Lonzo way back in the lead up to the 2017 draft. And we all remember that Monday Night Raw segment where LeVar Ball was all being all goofy and stuff. But anyway, that's resulted in his slide to the 5th round. Now, if he somehow managed to get to the backup slot, and we'll see how he does in preseason, it's going to be on him to try to prove everyone wrong, including those he'll have to surpass if he wants to get, let alone the backup slot. And then I haven't mentioned this guy at all, Jerry Jeudy. I was surprised in his at a midseason surge last year. I thought he was one of the surprises from last year in Cleveland, and even made the Pro Bowl. But Jerry Jeudy, can he repeat his success from last year? There's obviously still a quarterback competition to sort out, and if either one of those quarterbacks can get the best out of him, or let alone the vice versa, but we'll see. But maybe even with all the uncertainty at quarterback, I think maybe Jerry Jeudy can make the most of it. So I'll at least give the skid marks a little bit of credit for a little something. They admitted, the ownership, the front office, they had at least admitted, at least implicitly, that they made a very stupid decision in trading that much assets for Deshaun Watson. So they went out of their way to get not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 quarterbacks that, while they may not provide the immediate solution for their ongoing problem that's been going on since 1999, there have been countless quarterbacks that the skid marks have had in their 25 plus duration since they've been back in the league. It's been pretty obvious for the skid marks that they're a team that they're going to be once again going nowhere this season. So I wish whoever's going to win this quarterback competition leading up to September the best of luck, because they're going to need it for this very flawed and cash-strapped team. So let's move on to the other Ohio team across this state, and that is the Cincinnati Bengals. So the Bengals last year, they got off to a very poor start, and by the time they got to December, they were looking at 4-8, and they were on the verge of getting eliminated from playoff contention. So their lives were basically at stake, and they went on a late season run. They won 5 straight games, but even when they won 5 straight games going into that last week in January, still wasn't enough to secure even the 7th seed for the second straight year. So they got this 9-8 record for the second straight year, but didn't make the playoffs. So you still have a really good quarterback in Joe Burrow and this talented receiving core with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, but you still have a pretty flawed team. So going into 2025, your goal is to make it back to the playoffs for the first time since 2022. And more importantly, hope for better defensive play, because my God, that defense last year was one of the worst in the league. Like, they were giving up shit left and right. So much so that Joe Burrow in that offense basically had to put the team on its back. Like, pretty much. So, speaking of that defense, that was pretty much the biggest need. That was I'd say the only need of this past offseason. Like, fixing that entire damn defense. Because aside from Geno Stone at safety and corner Dax Hill and defensive lineman BJ Hill in the front 7, that defense needed a serious major retool. But the problems just didn't start there, because there were a lot of major issues that were going to go way later on throughout this offseason. But going on the other side of the fence for the Bengals, they still need to find solutions again to that porous offensive line, because guard Alex Kappa was a major weakness to the line, and he opened up a lot of gaps in the interior that got Joe Burrow sacked. Now, the offensive line, it wasn't, I'd say, as bad as, previous iterations for the Bengals, but it was still kind of poor. And then going into this offseason, they had to make a decision on whether to tag and trade or re-sign T. Higgins, because they initially tagged him, but it was at the cost of $26 million. So they had to make a decision during free agency as to whether to tag and trade him to another team or find a way to re-sign him long term, because that franchise tag was pretty hefty. $26 million. That's a lot of money for just a 1-year rental. But if they wanted to re-sign him long term, you also had to get an extension done for Jamar Chase, because he was also extension eligible. But somehow, some way, the Bengals actually managed to do that. They re-signed both of them to big, fat 4-year extensions. I'm like, damn, how'd they get that done? Like, literally, how'd they get, how'd they have the money? How'd they have the assets to re-sign both of them? That was like magic. That was like, I don't know how they got those resources, but hey, whatever works for Joe Burrow. But obviously it comes at the cost of somewhere, but they managed to get that ish done. So on the other side of the fence, they released edge rusher Sam Hubbard, who immediately announced his retirement afterwards. So yeah, that's pretty much the opposite end of the fence for when it comes to addressing their needs on the defense. But it doesn't stop there, pal, because edge rusher Trey Hendrickson, he requested a trade, and as of this moment, there's been no extension, no trade for one of their top players in the pass rush. So not only do they not have Sam Hubbard anymore, and Trey Hendrickson is still not at camp, and he may not be at training camp. So yeah, not exactly good for the Bengals in that front 4. But at least they re-signed BJ Hill, who was a free agent. And they also released their depth edge rushers, Joseph Asai and Cam Sample, offensive lineman Cody Ford, and they re-signed one of their top tight ends, Mike Gesicki. So, hey, they at least did something, I guess. So looking at some of the moves that they had in free agency, some of the other moves, not really anything too notable, if you ask me. But one of the weirdest things that they did in free agency, like late this past offseason was release Jermaine Pratt at linebacker. Like you need help at the front seven. And again, this goes back to the point of, sorry, they have birds outside. But this goes back to the point of, the defensive needs. And the Bengals are doing the exact opposite of that. Why are you releasing your key defensive players like Jermaine Pratt and then releasing Sam Hubbard to let him retired? What's the end game for the Bengals here? To make their defense even worse? I don't get it. So, looking at the draft, they drafted edge rusher Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M, and as of right now, he still hasn't signed his rookie contract. He's still holding out, and yeah, that's bad news for Cincinnati. They also drafted linebacker Demetrius Knight from South Carolina, probably to replace Jermaine Pratt, and they add some help on the offensive line, Dylan Fairchild and Jalen Rivers. So, again, going back to the defense, where's the help? Where's the help for this defense overall? Especially in the secondary. I mean, they did their due diligence to add help for the defensive front, but not really because, well, Shamar Stewart still not signed with the team, but especially in the secondary. Where's the help? Where's the help for Geno Stone? Where's the help for Dax Hill? If you're looking at it, to be honest with you, this defense is bound to be even worse than last year. And that's not good news for Joe Burrow. But speaking of Joe Burrow, he has at least long-term pass-catching security. Again, it was surprising that the Bengals managed to lock down both Higgins and Chase to long-term deals. Again, where did they get the money? Where did they get the money? Where did they get the assets? But that's the least of their concerns. I mean, obviously, it came at the cost of adding help to their defense, but at least for now, the Bengals and Joe Burrow have their safety nets at receiver. So looking at the key games for the Bengals this season, you have to go to Cleveland in week 1 again to take on the Browns, a place where the Bengals haven't exactly had much success there, other than I believe they won in Cleveland last season. Then they go to Minnesota to take on the Vikings, a familiar game between Jamar Chase taking on Justin Jefferson. And then they go to Denver to take on the Broncos and then to take on Bo Nix and them. And then week 5, they host the Detroit Lions in what should be an interesting game between both teams. So that should be a fun game. So, again, going back to that defense, that's the biggest question I have for this team. Is someone going to step up to help this very, very bad defense? I mean, I've been asking that all in the last couple of minutes throughout previewing the Bengals. Are they going to get any damn help? Jermaine Pratt game released and Shamar Stewart also continuing to hold out. It's not helping things. It's not helping things if you ask me. And then looking at that offensive line, are they going to develop fast enough to help protect Joe Burrow? I mean, again, it was slightly a little bit better than previous years, but these latest additions are going to have to develop into more than above average if they want to protect Joe Burrow and, once again, carry the Bengals to at least the 7th seed, because if we're looking at that terrible defense, I don't see them getting the AFC North, let alone a 5 seed. Unless, Joe Burrow plays out of his mind. So, if we're looking at the perspective of things, Cincy at least locked down their 2 key offensive weapons for him. But it came at a steep price, because now they're still left with no defense to help them out. All around. It's not just the secondary, but not even in the front 4. Are we going to be seeing the same song and dance from last year that could possibly cost Zach Taylor his job this year? I mean, it's possible, because the Bengals in that front office, they're going to be looking at a scapegoat somewhere. So moving on to the Steel City, and we look at one of the more interesting teams that had one of the most interesting off seasons this past couple months, and that was the Pittsburgh Steelers. So looking at last year for Pittsburgh, the Steelers they started out 6-2 in 2024, and they were in prime position to win the AFC North and head into the playoffs, hosting a playoff game. But once they faced real competition in the final stretch of the season, their flaws, especially at quarterback, got exposed real hard. They lost grip of the division to the Baltimore Ravens, and well, yeah, they lost the division. And once they lost to them too, they had to go on the road to face the Ravens in a 3-match, and they got handed to them convincingly in that playoff 3-match. And yeah, that was pretty much that for the Pittsburgh Steelers, despite being 10-7, but had to play as a 6-seeded wildcard team instead of being AFC North champions and hosting a playoff game. So obviously your goal this time around, this upcoming season, is to reverse that. You have to try to win the AFC North at minimum. And that started with finding the long-term answer at quarterback, because neither Russell Wilson nor Justin Fields worked out for them. So the Steelers had to once again restart at the quarterback position, whether it was in free agency or in the draft. But the most important thing was finally getting that long-term answer at quarterback, since Ben Roethlisberger retired after the 2021 campaign. They tried with Kenny Pickett, didn't work out, and they tried the short-term route with Russell Wilson nor Justin Fields this past season, and that failed. And I'll get into all that quarterback stuff in just a bit, because it really started to pick up steam real good recently. And then they had to get more help for corner Joey Porter Jr., who didn't have a lot of help on the opposite side of him, and that got exposed real hard late in the season when the Steelers started to lose their grip on the division. So they had to get him more help. So looking at some of the juicy stuff this past offseason for the Steelers and why it was one of the most interesting ones coming out of the offseason, well, it all started when they traded away George Pickens to the Cowboys in return for a third-round pick next year and a 2027 fifth-round pick. So George Pickens, this decline started, I'd say, 2 years ago, and it didn't get any better for the Steelers. So, it was time to move on for both sides. So, in return, the Steelers trade for a receiver from the Seattle Seahawks, DK Metcalf, in return for this year's second-round pick. And actually, it was the reverse. This was the trade that started things for the Steelers. And everyone initially thought that, this is going to be the new duo for the Steelers. DK Metcalf and George Pickens. They're going to be the new duo for whoever's going to be that long-term quarterback. But no, they ship off George Pickens after the draft. And I'm just thinking, like, man, that was interesting. And then this is where things get really juicy. This is where things get really juicy in June, last month. They finally, after a lot of waiting, after a lot of pondering and pandering, and they literally waited 3 months to do this. They signed Aaron Rodgers. Everyone thought that, once he got released from the Jets. No, they waited 3 months. They waited for Aaron Rodgers for 3 months. They waited for him to ponder on his decision to whether to play this year. And they didn't sign anyone else. They didn't draft anyone else. They got Aaron Rodgers in June. Literally most recently. But no, the domino effect didn't end there. They also traded for corner Jalen Ramsey and tight end Jonnu Smith from the Miami Dolphins, as well as a 2027 7th-round pick. But at the cost of trading away their top safety, Minkah Fitzpatrick, and a 2027 5th-round pick. And I'm not sure if the cost is going to, the return on investment is going to be good on that, but we'll see. So looking at some of the other moves that the Steelers made this past offseason, they didn't really lose all that many people of note. Like obviously the quarterbacks, receiver Mike Williams, they lost Najee Harris. I mean, pretty much almost everybody was expendable. But the additions were also really not that notable as well, like Malik Harris from the Ravens, or Darius Slay from the Eagles, who was released shortly after the Super Bowl, safety Juan Thornhill from the Browns, and then 3 months prior to getting Aaron Rodgers, everyone thought the starting quarterback was going to be Mason Rudolph, once again making his return to the Steelers. But no, that got shafted out the window. In the draft, they didn't really do much of note, but they did at least beef up the defensive line, getting Derek Hammond from Oregon. So getting some help for Cam Hayward. And then they drafted a new running back in the name of Caleb Johnson from Oregon. And then they added some more help for not just Cam Hayward and their new defensive tackle, but also gave them some help for TJ Watt and Jack Sawyer from Ohio State. And then maybe another developmental project for a long-term answer. So there you go. At least the Steelers are finally getting something in Will Howard from Ohio State. So the Steelers are I guess they could say that they didn't avoid the long-term game that much, but they're still playing it short-term with Aaron Rodgers. But they're taking another big risk, another big swing, I guess. So it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that Aaron Rodgers was going to sign with the black and gold during the offseason. But it's just the fact that it took him this long to do it. This long for Aaron Rodgers to make up his mind. It cost the Steelers in drafting Shadur Sanders, but honestly, I can't really blame them, given that the drama he brought and for them to not really consider being one of the many teams to not consider bringing him on. So I can't really blame the Steelers for that. But Rodgers does seem a bit more relieved and calm, especially now that he's had a somewhat full offseason to work with, and well, getting a little bit of a breather after not really having much in the last 2 years with the Jets. So you also have to consider with the recent news that this upcoming season might be his last overall. The pressure is now at an all-time high for Mike Tomlin and this team to bring in one more Lombardi trophy, not just to the city of Pittsburgh, but also for Aaron Rodgers before A-Rod hangs it up for good. So that pretty much goes to show you that the Steelers are hell-bent on going all in with not just bringing in Aaron Rodgers, but with all these trades late in the offseason. Because it was especially surprising to see a team like the Steelers who hadn't made too many big moves in the last 2 years or so. So they were pretty aggressive. Like Jalen Ramsey, bringing him in, like they need help at corner for Joey Porter Jr., and they got a very productive shutdown corner in Jalen Ramsey, even if he had been able to stay healthy in his tenure with Miami. But he's still pretty productive when healthy. But again, it came at the cost of losing their best safety in Minkah Fitzpatrick. So there's going to be questions on that deep end of the secondary. But as for the cornerback position, I think that should be okay for now. So when you look at the Steelers team, yeah, they're going all in. When they show how aggressive they've been for the first time in quite some time, but it also comes off as desperation to try and get Aaron Rodgers that one final ring, and also break that mediocrity that's been happening all around the city of Pittsburgh. So looking at some of the key games for the black and gold this upcoming season, obviously you point to week 1. Right at the gate should be a very interesting one for the Steelers because, yeah, they play Aaron Rodgers' old team immediately against the New York Jets. And also, they play another familiar quarterback in Justin Fields. So that should be a fun matchup, even if it's not on prime time. Then they face the Cleveland Browns. I'm not sure if it's at home or in Cleveland, but a key division game. And then another key division game the following week. You go to Cincinnati to take on the Bengals. So 2 back-to-back key division games. And both of those games, the Steelers have to obviously be careful not to fall into the trap, especially against the Browns. So the biggest question of all going to 2025 obviously points back towards Aaron Rodgers and how he's going to pan out as a Steeler. And I find it ironic and funny how Rodgers' post-Packers career has somewhat mirrored Brett Favre late in his career. You know, getting traded to the Jets, and then after he was done with the Jets. He moves on to a different team for his what's going to be his last run. Except Rodgers, obviously playing for his last for good. I mean, Favre with the Vikings and now Rodgers with the Steelers. Nonetheless, at least Rodgers will have a solid to good supporting cast around him with DK Metcalf and Caleb Johnson, as well as a top 15 defense that can back him up. So at least Rodgers has something going for him. And at least like in the last 2 games of the season, he played relatively well. But I mean, to be fair, the last 2 games of last season, the Jets were already well eliminated from playoff contention. So that's not really saying much. So it's, again, pretty clear the Steelers are desperate to finally get this Lombardi and this stench of mediocrity out of Pittsburgh, at least in the short term, because they abandoned their search for a long-term franchise quarterback somewhat, because they didn't abandon it completely, because they did draft a quarterback in Will Howard to develop behind Aaron Rodgers, and we'll see how that pans out. So they did, again, get a quarterback that is one in his potentially last season. So we'll see how Aaron Rodgers pans out. If he does have one last good run in him this upcoming season, maybe the Steelers could surprise many with a deep playoff run. But if Aaron Rodgers flames out and then calls it a career, then 2025 will have potentially serious ramifications on Mike Tomlin for pretty much all the wrong reasons. So the last team we're going to look at in the AFC North obviously points towards the flock. The Ravens flock. The Baltimore Ravens. So the Ravens, they were one of the better teams in the 2024 season last year. And when you look at this Ravens squad last year, they kept pace with the Steelers for the AFC North all season long. And when it came down to the wire, they managed to steal it from them thanks to their own late season surge and the Steelers' late season collapse, finishing the season 12-5. And then, although they took down their division rival in their first round 3 match, they fell just short of their bid to make it back to the AFC title game after making it the previous season in 2023, because they lost in a divisional playoff loss to the Bills after just coming back in that game against Buffalo, and that comeback falling just short after Mark Andrews just couldn't catch that 2-point conversion to tie the game. And that was just very unfortunate and haunting for the Ravens. So they're looking to move past that, and their goal for 2025 is to make it back to the playoffs, win the AFC title game, and represent the AFC in the Super Bowl for the first time since 2012. So looking at what the Ravens need to do this past offseason in order to achieve that goal is, well, address the defense. They need some help, especially in the secondary, because despite that late season turnaround where the Ravens were doing better at that position group, it was still a priority to upgrade the depth behind Marlon Humphrey and second-year player Nate Wiggins. So both of them did pretty good last season, but it's still clear that they needed help. They also needed some help around the interior offensive line, because that part of the O-line opened up a lot of holes. And that killed a lot of drives for Lamar Jackson and company when at some points they were red hot. So, they need to address that interior offensive line. And then the front seven, they need some help for linebacker Roquan Smith, because getting him another linebacker was another need. That front seven struggled in short and midfield passing defense. So, excuse me. They need to address that area of the field. So looking at some of the notable things that happened to the Ravens this past offseason, they re-signed a couple of their players like Ronnie Stanley at left tackle, Derrick Henry at running back. But probably the most notable thing that happened to the Ravens this past offseason was releasing their longtime kicker, their longtime Pro Bowl kicker and Super Bowl winning kicker, Justin Tucker, because there are some very notable allegations of inappropriate sexual conduct that came out. And the Ravens were like, we're not going to deal with this. We're not going to let this slide. And yeah, they released him as more details came out. And the NFL ended up suspending Tucker for 10 games. So yeah, it's a sticky situation that we're not going to talk about here on Very Cold Lasagna. So other than that, the Ravens didn't really do a whole lot because they didn't really have a lot of money to do a whole lot. But yeah, other than that, they didn't really lose a lot of players that were of note. Like, I think the only two, I guess you could say, were offensive linemen Josh Jones and Patrick McCarry. But they also didn't really add anyone of note because, again, the limited money that they had. Like receiver DeAndre Hopkins from the Chiefs and corner Chidobe Awuzie from the Titans. So, yeah, that's pretty much that. So they did most of their dirty work in the draft. So they did get help in the secondary throughout this draft with their first round pick, safety Malachi Starks from Georgia. So that's going to be a big help for Kyle Hamilton. Linebacker Mike Green from Marshall, major help for Roquan Smith. And then they retooled that offensive line with Emory Jones and Carson Vincent. And then corner Bilal Cohn from Western Michigan. And they got a new kicker in Tyler Loop from Arizona. But we're going to go back to the kicker position right away because obviously out with the old, in with the new. But yeah, again, it's unfortunate that Tucker's time with the Ravens ended like that. Because yeah, he was once considered the perfect kicker, but he was at his worst last year. But again, he was even at his decline a little bit 2 years ago. So that being said, they brought in a new kicker through the draft in Tyler Loop, who's supposed to replace Tucker, but from what I've seen in camp reports, he had been struggling. And they also brought in an undrafted rookie kicker, John Hyland, and he has fared better. So now all of a sudden there's this kicking competition that's been going on throughout OTAs and mini camps. And now the biggest test comes in training camp and preseason in a couple weeks and a month or so. So we'll see who comes out on top in this kicking competition and who's going to be starting come week 1. And going back to that defense, it gets some much needed help in the secondary with safety Malachi Starks. So Starks was a really good safety in college, and he's going to be a great asset in the deep end with Kyle Hamilton. We'll see how the cornerback group bears out, even if they got corner Bilal Cohn to help out to help out Nate Wiggins and Marlon Humphrey. So we'll see how that pans out. So looking at some of the key games for the Baltimore Ravens this season, you right away get a rematch with the Buffalo Bills in the divisional playoff game, week 1 on Sunday night. And then you head home for your home opener, week 2 against the Cleveland Browns and whoever their starting quarterback's going to be. And then week 3, going up against the Detroit Lions with their kind of new look-ish offense and who the new coordinators are. And then week 4, going to Kansas City to take on the Chiefs in the rematch of that 2023 AFC title game and maybe a preview of this year's AFC championship game if both teams all go that far. So obviously the biggest question of all going into this upcoming season is all about Lamar Jackson, because Lamar Jackson has performed pretty dang well when it comes to the regular season. But when it comes to the playoffs, he's had some mixed results. He has never gone past the AFC championship game, especially when it comes to the clutch. He has struggled in his 2 biggest opportunities to make the Super Bowl. Obviously, the biggest one being the 2023 AFC title game. So if the Ravens do make the playoffs this upcoming season, which honestly I expect them to do so, whether it's as division champions or a wild card, then the Ravens need Lamar Jackson to finally deliver, especially in the clutch, so they can make it to the big game in Santa Clara for the first time since 2012. So the Ravens didn't really need to address too much this offseason other than that defense and the interior offensive line. And I'd say they did a solid enough job in doing both. Now, the only questions I have for the Ravens that they'll need to answer if they want to make another deep playoff run are that kicking situation and obviously Lamar when it comes to the playoffs. So if they figure out both successfully, then the Ravens can not only keep their stranglehold on the AFC North, but potentially outlast the rest of the AFC this coming season. And we'll see what happens for them. So that's going to put a bow on this preview for the AFC North and part 3 of our 2025 team by team previews. And we're just about a quarter of the way done with them as we march on to the month of July. So let me know your predictions. Let me know your thoughts, your opinions on the teams in the AFC North. We talked about the Browns, the Steelers, the Bengals, and the Ravens. Whether you're or not you're a fan of these teams, let me know your opinions on all 4 of them in the comments below. Let's have a conversation about it on YouTube or on my socials at Very Cold Lasagna. Let me know if you agree or disagree with them. So anyway, that is it for this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I am your host, Dylan Lasagna, bringing you all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And as always, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with those takes. And until I see you, when I see it in the next episode and the next team by team previews for this month, peace out.